This year's Portland Sunday Parkways season is kicking off this Sunday, May 17th. Presented by Kaiser Permanente, you can join your community in biking, walking, scooting, rolling, whatever, in car-free streets for 5 glorious hours starting at 11 a.m. And this time, it's in Southwest Portland. There'll be food, family-friendly activities, community booths, local vendors, and live entertainment for a 2-mile stretch, including Gabriel Park, Village Park, Multnomah Arts Center, Multnomah Village, and Spring Garden Park. For the full Sunday Parkway schedule, event information, and ways to get involved, head over to portland.gov/Sunday Parkways. That's portland.gov/Sunday Parkways. I know Portland takes pride in our DIY culture, but you don't always have to do it yourself. TaskRabbit has been helping Rose City residents for over a decade with everything from furniture assembly to minor home repairs. And their app is super easy to use, so you can quickly get paired with a list of skilled taskers in your neighborhood who've already been rated and reviewed. Plus, there's transparent pricing, so there are no surprises at checkout. Cross those nagging home to-dos off your list, enjoy your weekend, download the TaskRabbit app, or visit taskrabbit.com today. This is CityCast Portland. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Today on CityCast Portland, we're talking about why City Council is pumping the brakes on funding the Moda Center renovations, plus tweaks to an existing city code aimed at fighting sex trafficking, and the heated debate about foie gras, and if we should be selling it within the city limits. Joining me today are Oregonian City Hall reporter Shane Dixon Kavanaugh and local food reporter Brooke Jackson-Glidden. Welcome on the show, you two.
Well, hello there, Claudia. Hi, Brooke.
Hi, happy to be here.
As most of our listeners know, before we jump into the news, I usually ask an opening question so any new listeners can get to know our guests a little better. And today's is based on the Portland Business Journal's finding that Oregon tourism is holding steady amid international visitor decline because in-state travel is actually rising. Inflation, the economy, gas prices, it's just making it so more Oregonians are choosing to vacation closer to home. So it made me curious what your favorite summer staycation is.
I think, if we're talking staycation as in like the state, gosh, my brain just gets overwhelmed because I travel a lot around the state. So I'm actually going to say that my favorite true staycation, so Portland, Oregon staycation, is to stay at Cascada on Alberta because you have that like really nice spa space where, you can like kind of hang out and chill. And then you're on Alberta, so I can pretend like I don't have a car and walk and head up to restaurants and shop. So I would say that's like, in terms of a Portland staycation, that's usually a go-to for me.
Well, similar to what Brooke said, if we've got the whole state to romp around in, there is just such an obscene embarrassment of riches. And I could list off a dozen or two places that I love to go to and go to every year. Not in Portland, but let's say Multnomah County proper, Oxbow Regional Park.
So beautiful.
Go out there, do some camping with your family or friends, go swimming in the Sandy River, go walking around in some old growth forests. I mean, I can't believe that I can get to Oxbow within 20 minutes of my house. I live in East Portland, so it's kind of close. But still, one of the wonderful things about Oxbow, too, is that it's a little bit in a canyon, so you don't get good cell phone reception. So you just got to put the phone away, and you got to just sort of be still, be present, and just love life. So Oxbow, for sure.
That's a great answer. And then you go to Sugar Pine, at least.
Yeah. Naturally. Yes.
You gotta go to Sugar Pine.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, I feel like people staying closer to home is good for all of us. More money, stays in the state. Also, like Shane was saying, we live in one of the most beautiful states in the entire country. So why not explore it? I feel like we have more waterfalls than most people have years in a lifetime. Like you're not going to be able to see every single waterfall. And sometimes I think about that. It makes me a little sad. You know how some people feel about like, oh, I'm never going to read every book in the library. I'm like, I'm never going to see every waterfall in Oregon, let alone like the Northwest,
Well, I'm pretty sure TLC had a cautionary tale about waterfalls. So
I was about to say.
Well, I wasn't going to chase them. I was going to look at them, Shane. Well, anyhow, thank you both for your answers. Appreciate them. On to the news. Shane, what's going on with the Moda Center? I feel like I thought we were locking in on the funding for it, but it appears that no, that's not what's happening.
Well, if you think we've locked in the funding for the Moda Center, Claudia, then you've just been drinking the Kool-Aid that Governor Tina Kotek has been serving and dishing, along with Mayor Keith Wilson and County Chair Jessica Vega Peterson. So I had a story that came out in our paper recently, just really taking a more sober-minded view of where things stand with this Moda Center arena project. We certainly had a lot of activity this spring in the short session with state lawmakers very quickly coming together in a bipartisan fashion to approve and commit up to $365 million to a Moda Center renovation agreement, in part to try to keep the Portland Trailblazers staying here in Portland now that they've been purchased by a group led by an out-of-state billionaire, Tom Dundon. And the key piece here is that the city and the county, so I want to be clear, it's both the city of Portland and Multnomah County are also partners in terms of coming up with with a funding package and a lease agreement between the city and the team. And we are certainly very far off from anything being finalized. But it's not just a matter of dollars and cents coming up with funding sources and streams on the local level. There's the question about whether or not Portlanders really want this in terms of, fully publicly funding an arena renovation with no financial contribution from the team, which seems to be sort of the starting point in these negotiations. And sort of the other key piece here is we're not just talking about funding specifically, which we still have to get to, but also what does a potential long-term lease agreement with the team look like? And that is a long conversation. It's going to be a negotiation, and none of that has even begun to start. And complicating all of this is the simple fact that there is sort of a timeline to this whole arena project as well, at least according to the Blazers and the project's largest boosters, because everybody sort of agrees that it would be ideal to try to have a fully renovated Moda Center by 2030, because that's when we are going to be hosting the women's Final Four here in Portland. To do that, we would have to start renovations on the arena beginning next summer in 2027. And to begin renovations on the arena by 2027, we would need to have everything in place, arguably, by the end of this year.
Oof.
So that's a lot. And lastly, I think the other piece that I'll say here, and I'm sorry I've been talking so much, but it is a pretty sticky and complex project and process. We also have 3 different government jurisdictions that are teaming up like Voltron to try to push this thing to the finish line. And they even have to just sort of figure out what they're agreeing to themselves before they can even start talking with the Blazers to negotiate a deal.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the same article, that you wrote, you also noted that the city took nearly 2 years to strike a deal with the Portland Timbers owner, Merritt Paulson, to revamp what was then PGE Park back in 2011. And as you noted, that was far less costly and complex. And this is different because we own the Moda Center. To me, that adds a complication that's why this discussion is so sticky. It's well, we kind of own the, and the councilor's well, we didn't buy it. we didn't
Right.
buy it. That was a 2024 issue, and that now we have to deal with. So I don't see how this is going to be resolved. And when I said, Shane, I thought the money was marked, was because I thought like there was already a plan in motion. Didn't we make money from the sale of the Blazers, tax-wise? Didn't we make a percentage from that sale? I remember speaking to City Council President Jamie Dunphy, and he just was like, why don't we use that money, like for the Moda Center? And I thought that was like such a clever, like, yeah, if we made money from the sale of the Blazers, shouldn't that money just go back to reinvest?
And that's what the city is likely going to propose doing with some of its financial commitments. So the city needs to come up with, they've agreed, when I say they, I should say Mayor Keith Wilson has agreed to put up $120 million toward this project.
Yeah.
Now, the city expects to get roughly $55 million from the sale of the Blazers that would come into city coffers. So the idea arguably would potentially be to put that money towards that 120. Then there's the question of where do we come up with the other 75? And I think, as Brooke and Claudia both probably know, that right now the sort of leading idea, or the one that the mayor has put forward, is to use funding from the Portland Clean Energy Fund, specifically toward the Moda Center renovations. But just to unlock that financial commitment requires a series of steps. It's also, would need council sign off, and would also need to get the sort of approval and green light from a grants committee that recommends all of the spending and funding for Clean Energy Fund dollars just by itself.
Yeah, the committee that is supposed to be guarding the money. I'm curious, Shane, what the discussion is there, because I mean, people have been trying to take that PSEF money since the moment it grew too big almost for the fund itself, and people have been successfully able to dip into that fund. But I'm not seeing how the Moda renovation is, because it's specifically for underserved populations, right? Shane, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, basically to help them prepare for the climate disaster that is approaching, right?
That's sort of partly the intent of the Portland Clean Energy Fund. It's also undergone some fairly significant transformation since its inception. I mean, for instance, hundreds of millions of dollars from that fund right now is just going back into city government to do projects that are ostensibly climate friendly or help with the city's resilience, and also may benefit historically underserved or marginalized groups and communities. And, similarly, a lot of the focus with the Clean Energy Fund specifically is around energy efficiency upgrades. And there is certainly an argument to be made that a massive renovation of a 31-year-old arena could definitely use some energy efficiency upgrades. And I would also say that PSEF money has gone to the opening and renovation of a building in Old Town for where Street Roots is now headquartered. So it's not without precedent. This is significantly a lot more money.
It's just different. It's a basketball team. You know what I mean when it comes down to it?
Yeah.
Okay, so my immediate thought here, right, is that it feels like this is born out of a lot of fear that the Trailblazers are going to leave the city, right? So, I mean, in your perspective, Shane, what actually is the chance of that happening?
So first of all is just the simple question of, does it really cost $600 million to renovate the Moda Center? That is what the estimated renovation cost is. That's coming only from the Blazers, and they have yet to publicly release sort of the underlying documentation that shows why we need $600 million for the renovation. That's number one. Number two, with or without the Blazers, and going back to Council President Jamie Dunphy, he will say this: this is now a city-owned asset. So to sort of say that this is, putting $600 million toward an out-of-state billionaire is kind of true, because this might be a precondition to keep the Blazers in Portland. But the city now owns Moda, and they're going to have to renovate this thing one way or the other.
Exactly.
Dunphy will talk about this. If you ever want Beyonce or Taylor Swift to come to the Moda Center, it actually needs some significant upgrades. We haven't really gotten into that part of the conversation or the equation yet, but like that is also a piece here. Last but certainly not least, this question about whether or not the Blazers could take up stakes and head elsewhere. There seems to be some significant disagreement on how true that might be. But I would say it's certainly within the realm of possibility at a minimum. And that's why all of the negotiating here is going to be crucial, and an important factor, and why there are so many steps between now and whether or not we even figure out this thing is going to happen.
Well, it's clear this is going to be a continuing story and a continuing push and pull. So we'll be for sure keeping an eye on that. Let's take a quick break here, and when we come back, tweaks to an existing city ordinance that is supposed to quell sex trafficking, particularly on 82nd. Did you know May is National Bike Month? And it's Oregon, so of course we have a ton of ways you can celebrate. Like this Friday, May 15th, is the official Bike to Work Day. And the Oregon Department of Transportation wants you to stay safe out there. So if you haven't been on your bike for a couple of seasons or are new to the area, get reacquainted with our local traffic laws. Bicyclists follow the same rules as motorists. Remember to remain alert, always wear a helmet, use lights, and wear bright reflective clothing, especially for night riding. And if you don't know your bike hand signals, learn them. They keep you and everyone on the road safe, including other riders. For more tips on how to stay safe and more on statewide events, head over to OregonBikeWalk.org. That's www.OregonBikeWalk.org.
When the unexpected happens, a serious injury, a catastrophic crash, or even a wrongful death, the impact isn't just personal. It can affect families, neighborhoods, and the safety of our entire community. In those moments, you deserve more than legal help. You deserve advocates committed to making Portland safer for everyone. At Diamore Law Group, you're not just getting a lawyer. You're getting a trial team led by veteran attorney Tom Diamore, who has spent over 30 years holding corporations, negligent drivers, and unsafe institutions accountable. From investigating what went wrong to bringing in experts and taking cases all the way to trial, they do the work it takes to protect their clients and prevent the next tragedy. And you don't pay unless they win. Contact Diamore Law Group at 503-222-6333 or visit Diamore Law to schedule a free consultation. They're here to stand up for individuals and for a safer Portland.
So guys, I've been following this new city ordinance that is targeting sex trafficking, which Portland does have a growing issue with. Just 5 days ago, almost every local news outlet reported that 6 teenagers ranging from 13 to 17 years old were recovered during a Portland police multi-week mission focusing on human trafficking. The minors were found along 82nd Avenue. Esther Garrett, the founder and CEO of Safety Compass, that's a nonprofit organization that helps sex trafficking survivors in Oregon, said that they've also noticed an increase in cases involving minors. In the past, we've also covered reporting from Willamette Week where they actually conducted stakeouts at massage parlors, which there are many of on the east side, and found that a good number of them were using immigrant labor, didn't speak English, and appeared to never leave the premises. These spots also had very shady business setups, were in clear violation of state law. Their clientele also consisted of pretty much just dudes. We'll link to that episode in our show notes if you want to catch up there. But back to the city nuisance ordinance change, it's become very clear that something needs to happen. And our existing nuisance ordinances aren't strong enough. So these tweaks that were proposed were actually pretty controversial among the city council. Councilor Steve Novick brought forth a proposal, and he told Willamette Week that his aim was just to make it harder for sex purchasers to exploit young people and to ensure that students at McDaniel High School aren't walking through a quote-unquote gauntlet of prostitution while en route to school. Now, the ordinance did pass by a narrow 7-5 vote. All the progressive Peacock councilors voted against it, except for Councilor President Jamie Dunphy, who voted yes. The councilors not backing the ordinance change pointed to police bias regarding enforcement, possible harassment, and penalization of small business owners, and just the fear that this would drive human trafficking deeper into the shadows. But here's what the policy amends. It adds to our already existing chronic nuisance property code to include activities like operation of a massage business in violation of state law, possession of a loaded firearm, bookmark that, that's a question, and prostitution procurement, or essentially pimping. I had to look that one up because prostitution procurement was such a weird legalese way of saying, forcing people to become prostitutes. Now, if a property receives at least 3 nuisance complaints within a 90-day time frame, either documented through a police report or a declaration by law enforcement that it has probable cause to believe that such activity has occurred, then the city administrator would have the authority to require that property owner to take steps to abate the nuisance, meaning the onus is now on the property owner. So upon first hearing the changes, to me, this is my personal opinion, it felt like the bare minimum. It appears the city is simply making the property owners responsible for what happens on their property, a tactic, I might add, that the Progressive Caucus was happy to enforce when it came to the ICE building. Though I am confused by the additions of possession of a loaded firearm. I don't understand how a city ordinance can supersede the Second Amendment. So I'm just not fully understanding that context. And I reached out to a few reporters who reported on it, and they themselves were like, I don't understand it either. Also, just like backtracking a little, making the property owners kind of the ones who are responsible. Again, that's the same argument we've been hearing for the ICE building, right? Like, hey, this is causing a bunch of nuisance to all the people who live there and health concerns, all this stuff. So I understand that argument, but the concerns I think the Progressive Caucus is having is like the Korean mini mart owner, the Indian hotel manager are now supposed to somehow solve the problem of drugs and sex trafficking on 82nd. And it's something the city and the police couldn't do. And now it's all on them, And I understand that like the law is supposed to target the people who own the property who are taking part in it. But like, I understand why it's so squishy. So I'm curious what you guys think.
I think that what comes to mind for me, also, again, along the lines of bias, I do have, speaking of ICE, I do have concerns about how increased focus on that specific street may draw focus to a specific community that could be targeted by ICE. So I think that increasing criminal oversight in that area, it's sticky, right? For the same reasons that you've mentioned, but also because I am concerned that continuing to criminalize that area may have larger issues that we can't anticipate yet. I think Candace Avalos specifically also mentioned, again, issues of bias and how that specifically impacts her constituency. I can understand that perspective. But I also see what you mean when it comes to specifically focusing on the people who are trafficking versus the people who are being trafficked.
At the end of the day, like what we're looking at here is specifically changes to our nuisance code, right? So, and arguably it makes it, in theory, potentially somewhat easier to designate a motel or other property, a nuisance property, if there is this type of activity that's being facilitated through that property. So this is largely administrative to some extent, and it gives the city some additional tools in its tool belt that aren't necessarily law enforcement focused. However, I think what you're hearing from the, progressive counselors who raised concerns about this is historically, the code enforcement by the city of Portland was misused and arguably abused because it was a tool that was only used against, certain property owners and not others. So like that history is very real. And, there is certainly I think there is probably a compelling case to be made. And I think Councilor Avalos brought this up specifically is, depending on how you approach enforcement with code violations and nuisance properties is you could end up pushing some of this activity like even further into the shadows.
That's my fear, right?
That's exactly why the counselors aren't voting on it. But the one faction of like the community that showed up to support the ordinance change and were all unified were the students and principal of McDaniel High. I think they're just like, I don't care, just do something, So it is complicated because, again, sex trafficking there's victims, but then there's also consensual sex workers. And it's like how to make sure that both of these two factions are being served in a sense by the same law. I feel like, as Shane was saying, this is a very interesting way to go about it. It's almost administrative, but I think the concern is that it's going to be used more for law enforcement rather than for like, hey, let's keep an eye on this property and from here come up with a better plan of action. And I think that is the concern, but I think this is all hypothetical until it starts getting enforced. Mm-hmm. And so we're just going to have to wait and see, which can be nerve-wracking. All right, well, let's take a quick break here. And when we come back, Brooke is going to explain this whole foie gras debate and why it's become an issue in our food scene. All right, Brooke, what is going on? I feel like I've never seen foie gras on the menu anywhere, aside from like Le Pigeon or whatever. I think it's always like chicken mousse, chicken liver mousse.
Chicken liver mousse, inescapable. No, I think, it's interesting you say that, right? So for anyone who is unfamiliar, foie gras is essentially the fatty liver of a duck or goose that has been force-fed. Force feeding does sort of enlarge that liver and add to the flavor of the liver, which is what makes it a delicacy. The main crux of the argument on the side of a ban is this cruel treatment of animals. It's not sustainable. And, there are not people producing foie gras locally in the same way. It's primarily produced in New York State. You're flying it over here anyway. But it is actually not that common in this city, actually. I think something like 7 or 8 businesses actually sell it, including 2 Gabe Recker restaurants, Le Pigeon and Canard, which made them kind of the center of this most recent hearing that happened in late April, city council hearing. So to give a little backstory, this proposed ordinance would ban the sale of foie gras specifically within Portland city limits, and restaurants that go ahead and do it would end up receiving a fine, somewhere between $1,000 and $5,000 for each violation. So, that adds up fast. I think that this is something that has come up again and again historically, specifically because it is successfully banned in other major American cities. It's not sold in New York City, for instance, and there are a lot of places in Europe that have successfully banned foie gras, primarily because they see it as, this is not going to be a surprise to anyone who heard what I just said, but as sort of unethical, right? So this was specifically brought and has been supported by a subsection of Peacock. Mitch Green has been a big champion of it, Angelita, Tiffany, Jamie. And this has been something that has been really championed by animal rights activists and also vegan chefs. So you're seeing a lot of vegan chefs and I'm thinking of the folks at Orange and Blossom or Feral have been specific proponents of a foie gras ban in Portland. I will say this hearing got really kind of spicy. Catherine Chu Hamilton at Portland Mercury wrote a piece with a few of just the sort of like most divisive quotes from the testimony, is what I'll say. Something you heard from both sides is that this is a super small population of people impacted. Like, the people for the ban, they're saying there are only a handful of restaurants that sell it. Why wouldn't we just ban it, And the people, the restaurant owners that were in support of it said, this is only impacting a few people. Why are we wasting our time on this? So I guess I'm interested, initial perspective from y'all. How do you feel about something like this?
I don't eat foie gras, so it doesn't impact me personally. Like, I feel like if people who feel passionate enough to want to ban it can ban it, go for it. it seems unethical. It definitely feels whatever. But I also hear the other side of like restaurant owners that are like, why does it bother you? There's like 4 or 5 of us that are selling this thing. I do find it interesting, though, that we're flying it from New York State and even New York City isn't selling it. And I find that funny.
Right. And I will say, again, like, the thing that is really fascinating here is that it really almost feels like it's targeting one specific restaurant, which is Le Pigeon. Le Pigeon has this specific dessert that they've been selling for ages, which is foie gras profiterole. And when I say that this is an internationally famous dessert, it is. It's been written about on a national and international scale. It's essentially an ice cream sandwich with choux pastry and foie gras ice cream, right? It is a main draw to that restaurant. It's one of those dishes that has not left the menu for years and years, decades perhaps. And that is a restaurant that people have considered to be one of the best in the city for, again, we're talking about over a decade.
I think what's interesting here is, and Brooke is kind of getting at this, is largely this issue, this policy is almost purely symbolic. And depending on what side of the debate you're on will inform the perceived message that it's going to send, right? So the proponents are very clear that the way in which this food is produced is horrific and it's cruel, and we, as the city of Portland, do not support or condone this type of animal cruelty. Conversely, we could also, many of the opponents are making this passionate claim that, one of the things that Portland has going for it at the moment is a world-class food scene. And our small businesses are the lifeblood, for our local economy, arguably. And so this is kind of taking a symbolic shot at that from that perspective. And it also suggests or informs what are the priorities of city council right now. I think there is a large question about, given all of the other challenges that Portland is facing, like
we literally just talked 2 big ones right now with sex trafficking and the Moda Center renovation.
Right.
And now we're talking about foie gras. Yeah.
So I will say that, like, a Gabe Rucker quote from that day, and I think this is a pretty inelegant way of saying it, but he said, when you're in the news for making it legal to smoke crack on our sidewalks, you might want to think twice before making duck liver illegal, right? Kind of a yikes. I will say that Gabe Rucker is in recovery, so has a specific relationship to this. But I do think that the broader point of why is this what we're focused on right now does seem to be pretty prescient among people who are kind of generally tuning into this issue.
Brooke, I know one of the comparisons that people have made in this debate, the opponents have said, if you really care about animal cruelty, why aren't you going after people who produce poultry or chicken? Like, why isn't there a chicken ban? Do you think that, I'm just curious, like, do you think that has merit to that argument or not?
I kind of do, actually. So if you look at some of the very few poultry farms that operate, I mean, the main one that Le Pigeon sources from, that's a farm owned by El Salvadoran refugees. They are growing their own feed on site and donating their fertilizer to other farms. It's kind of, in the words of Andy Fortgang, it's the exact kind of farming we should be supporting. And if you look at those big poultry farms, they are treating chickens much, much worse on a much, much larger scale.
Totally. I mean, this is when it comes down to you were asking me and I was like, dude, I eat meat. I have no leg to stand on what's right and what's wrong. Like, I'm like, if there's some passionate people and they want to pass something, good for them. If people don't want to pass it, good for them. We live in a society where we eat meat. And like, to me, I'm just like, there's way worse abuse happening in these in mass farming. And we all know this. Like, we're not like, what's going on? So not to say because of that, we should allow all the other things. But to me, this is like, it sounds awful, but I'm like, I get why some policy makers are like, hey, we chew gum and walk or whatever, but I'm like, this is taking up time. And why are we talking about this? But I'm curious what our listeners think. Because I'm sure there's a lot of vegans who listen. I'm curious, do all the vegans think the same thing? Are they all just like, yeah, let's ban? Or are they also just like, dude, we got other stuff, So I'm very curious what people are thinking. I think just because of my job, I have little tolerance for stuff like this. I gotta be honest, where I'm just like, we were literally talking about 2 of these She said, do affect a much wider population of our city. And now we're talking about this thing that I'm like, oh man, poor Gabriel, I suppose. I don't know. Oh no, his ice cream. Oh no. All right. Before we go, I just wanted to give a quick thank you to some of the newest members of our membership program, the CityCast Portland Neighbors. So just a big shout out to Amy V, Carrie M, Eric I, Nicole W, and Pedro G. Thank you so much for joining, you guys. We really appreciate it. If you're curious about our membership, hit up membership.citycast.fm. It's got some really good perks like ad-free listening, invites to member-only events. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year. That's membership.citycast.fm. You guys, Brooke, Shane, thank you so much for spending time with me this morning. Thanks for going through some of these headlines, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.
Claudia, it is always such a pleasure and privilege to join you on your show.
Yeah, love to hang out. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. That's all for today here on CityCast Portland. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, share it with a friend, rate, leave us an amazing review, and don't forget, you can support this show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Portland neighbor. Just visit membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.